Hello, welcome to In the Know with HRCI. I'm Amin Isa, GPHR, PHR, and today our session is going to be very special. We're going to talk about a survey that was done about the state of engagement among HR professionals. And today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Salvatore Falletta, who's going to talk to us about his findings. Um, Dr. Falletta is a GPHR certified individual. He's a professor at Drexel University. He's been a director of HR of development programs, and he was a former CHRO and head of global HR research and analytics at Intel. This research was done in participating with HRCI, and the findings were very compelling, especially in this environment that we're working in and living in today. So let's get going. Um, th- Basically, the study looked at the state of engagement among HR professionals, and it also came to the conclusion that one size does not fit all in the approaches that HR should be dealing with. Also, Dr. Falletta will discuss all the underlying drivers of employee engagement through various HR challenges and segments, and he will give us a final recommendation of what to do in our own shops and environments. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Salvatore Falletta. Welcome, Dr. Falletta.
Well, thank you, Amini, for that warm welcome. I greatly appreciate it. I thought before we move on to the findings and the gist of the study, I provide just a little context in terms of the research project. So we've all been struggling ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, a couple of years back, and the Great Resignation and all the media-driven hype around this notion of quiet quitting. And we've seen kind of a market decline in employee engagement as a whole. That's all professionals globally, including HR professionals. And then Gallup, for example, estimates they've been tracking a decline since 2020, and it's been precipitously trending down ever since COVID, that is. So, for example, Gallup reports about 34% of workers describe themselves as engaged in their jobs, which is down from the previous year. And this was a report that they recently came out with just a few months ago, and they were looking at the data from 2021 as compared to 2020. So when you think about it, these trends are troubling. When you consider the current talent crisis and the widespread attrition that's still underway, despite all the recent high-profile downsizing and layoffs that we see in the news. And of course, the HR profession has been hard at work. They serve the front lines trying to ameliorate and stem off these engagement and attrition trends that we've been seeing, regardless of sector and industry. And all of this has really led to it served as the impetus, if you will, for this joint study between Drexel University and the HR Certification Institute. And so, as Amini mentioned, as part of our research, we decided to send out a comprehensive survey that measured the extent to which HR professionals are engaged in their work, and we also asked various survey items related to talent management as well. And we, interestingly, when we did some preliminary research, we found that little is known about employee engagement in terms specifically for HR professionals as a critical talent segment. So again, we launched the research survey a few months ago, and it generated a lot of buzz globally in terms of the HR community. In total, 2,032 HR professionals completed the survey. So that said, let's move on, and let me share some of the highlights with you in terms of the findings. Okay, so remember what I mentioned that Gallup found that about 34% of employees as a whole are engaged, and that's been down from the previous year of 36%. So when you look at these findings, these are actually pretty good findings. Overall, 70% of HR professionals are engaged. Compare that to the 34% in terms of employees as a whole. Those are compelling results. That's good news, right? We also found, though, in this study that mid-level managers were the least engaged group compared to senior HR leaders and executives, which were found to be the most engaged group. And if you think about it, that shouldn't be too surprising, that we tend to see this dip. There tends to be this disillusioned middle when you talk about mid-level management and that's managers, supervisors, and even director level. So when they tend to be the least engaged compared to executives and individual contributors when you compare them to those groups. In fact, about 10 percentage points lower than the overall. And then when you look at executives, of course, executives in HR tend to be more highly engaged. VPs around 84%, EVPs 91%, which is incredible. And then chief HROs around 86.6%. Again, shouldn't be too surprising with the mid-level managers. This is a trend that you see across all employee groups, not just HR. There tends to be that disillusioned middle managers. And you can think about middle managers really are the backbone of the organization. They do, they're stressed out. They're doing the lion's share of the people management, and they're literally and figuratively stuck in the middle, if you will.
So, Dr. Follett, you think? So, I'm sorry. So you think that's why maybe they're least engaged because they're over-engaged? They have so much going on. Could that be a factor?
It could be. Again, mid-level managers, mid-level management is a tough place to be. You're as I mentioned, you're figuratively and literally stuck in the middle. They tend to be overworked, in terms of span of control. Organizations are increasingly flatter now, and so this is a hard-working group of people. And it kind of makes sense. An individual contributor doesn't have the burden and responsibility of people management.
True.
Managing people is a lot of work. It's a hard job. And then senior executives, when you're at the senior level, you have perhaps a little more latitude in your role. You get to make critical decisions. And mid-level managers don't always have the same level of decision rights, nor the resources necessarily, fiscal, human resources, to do what they need to do to be successful in their jobs. So it's a harder role in general, but still, overall, the results are pretty good, even for this group, 60% and 59% for directors, 60% for managers. That's not bad, but that means 40% are disengaged.
Right, that's worrisome.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what else you found for us.
Sure.
All right, so the underlying drivers of employee engagement.
Yeah, so it's measuring. This is really important for all of us to kind of get our heads around. That measuring employee engagement in and of itself alone is never enough, right? So you can measure employee engagement, employee experience, employee fulfillment, employee thriving, whatever outcome you want to focus on. It matters, but in and of itself, just all you're going to see is, all right, our employees are moderately engaged, or they're highly engaged, or they're disengaged. And all right, then what? You're not going to know exactly where to focus your action and change unless you focus on the drivers that matter most by various talent segments. So organizations tend to apply a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to the drivers of engagement. There's these usual suspects that I'll share with you in just a few minutes. And we need to resist this tendency of applying a one-size-fits-all approach. That might work for the broader population, employees as a whole, but it's not going to work for critical talent segments, particularly high potentials and other critical talents or workforce segments, I should say. So when I talk about drivers, what I mean these are the myriad of factors, variables, resources, conditions, characteristics, and employee value propositions that matter most to employees. It's what moves the needle on engagement or precedes the state of engagement. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide.
So here are the top engagement drivers.
Yeah, so the top engagement drivers in the study, what we did is we asked the HR professionals to rate a comprehensive list. It was pretty big, actually. It was 57 drivers. A little too long, perhaps, but we wanted to really present them with a broad range of drivers that could potentially matter, right, in terms of moving the needle in their engagement. We asked them to rate each of those 57 drivers, and we also segmented the drivers by various talent segments. So for all HR professionals as a whole, ethical workplace and work environment was high, as well as trust and integrity. So that's an interesting finding that we found that amid all the corporate scandals and our politics, for example, people in general, they want to work. They want leaders to be They want to trust their leaders, and they want leaders that have ethics and integrity, but they also want an overall ethical work environment. But they also desire a compassionate leader and manager behavior. Meaningful work is a very popular driver of engagement, and so is the effectiveness and quality of your direct manager, workplace culture, work-life balance. So all of these, including wellness and well-being, all of these, however, represent the usual suspects. It's what you see in the literature. It's what LinkedIn influencers and culture experts will contend that, hey, these are the drivers that matter the most. And if you look at the literature, this list of 10, these top 10 here, represent, again, the usual suspects and will move the needle for employees as a whole. But as you move into other talent segments, you'll see that they do differ.
Indeed. And none of these factors, the usual suspects, in spite of the way we've changed to hybrid workforces, remote work, haven't changed. People
Yeah.
still want these things and desire them. It's how the managers react and do them that makes sense, right?
Absolutely. And remote work, out of the 57, it was pretty close to the top 10. Remote
Yeah.
work as an option, flexible work arrangements, was in the top 15, by the way.
Okay. Okay.
So it was up there, but it didn't quite make the top 10 list. But it's very important for some. And
Right.
I imagine remote work for certain critical talent segments would be much higher, right, for
Indeed.
certain types of employees.
Indeed.
So here's an interesting finding. So you saw the results for all HR professionals as a whole. Here are the results for senior HR leaders. Now, these are VP, senior VP, and chief HR officers. These are the strategic factors that matter most to them. So you could see that, yeah, the usual suspects came into play in the black, right? Trust and ethical workplace, big factors. You'll see meaningful work there, compassionate leadership, workplace culture, the quality of the immediate manager or supervisor. Those represent the usual suspects. But
Right.
interestingly, the driver 3, 4, and 5, if you look at that, decision-making authority, access to budget and physical resources, how the organizational structure, which is related to how decisions flow across and up and down the organization. Those things matter. Those are key strategic factors that matter most if you're a senior leader. And it shouldn't be too surprising when you're
Right.
in an executive level position, not having decision-making authority or resources, budget, fiscal resources, or even human resources for that matter. And where you are in the organizational chart, it would matter. It would matter
Right.
to me as a former chief HR officer. So this shouldn't
Right.
be too surprising, really.
Right. Right. No, that's key. Thank you for pointing that out. And then the next ones are the aspiring leaders.
Yeah. Yeah, now this group was an interesting group. We asked them in the demographics section, HR professionals and the participants in the study, we asked them we asked them a couple things. One is we gave them an ambition scale from Angela Duckworth from the University of Pennsylvania. We asked them to rate their overall ambition. And we also asked participants to rate the extent to which they desire to, they had ambitions to aspire to the C-suite, meaning VP, senior vice president, chief HR officer. And so those who had high ambition index or ambition orientation, sometimes called ambition achievement orientation, and those who said they aspire to be in the C-suite, this is that group, aspiring HR leaders. Now, interestingly, the mix of drivers, you can see the usual suspects there: ethical
Right.
workplace, trust, meaningful work, wellness, workplace culture. As I said, meaningful work is a big one, compassionate leader. However, these are individuals who have aspirations to be a chief HR officer one day. And so it shouldn't be too surprising that things like advancement and promotion opportunities matter, right? It's number one, overwhelmingly the number one for this particular group. And these are ambitious, aspiring, emerging leaders, right, that are on the fast track, all right, or
Right.
want to be on the fast track. Job title matters, right? Obviously, right, if you want to be, these are individuals that wanted to be a VP, an EVP, or a chief HRO.
Right.
Decision-making authority and decision rights, go figure, right? And then compensation, that usually that's commensurate or goes hand in hand with advancement, promotion opportunities, a job title, et cetera. So this is the ambitious group. But what this does, it serves to illustrate that a one size fits all approach doesn't work. And
Right.
unfortunately, a lot of organizations, for a variety of reasons, they tend to apply a one size fits all approach. They'll take the usual suspects and they'll give it to 100% of their workforce. And they'll call it, oh, it's a wonderful, positive workplace culture, or we're going to create this employee experience for you. And yeah, those sound good and they're important, but they're nebulous in a sense. If you're an aspiring leader, whether you're in HR or in the business, right, or any part of the business, I should say, because HR is about the business as well. It doesn't really. I mean, those usual suspects matter, but they tend to be secondary drivers,
Right.
right? And so we keep prescribing the same solutions for everyone when we measure engagement, which absolutely it's maddening for those that are in critical talent segments like high potentials, aspiring leaders, critical skilled individuals. Those individuals, if you keep providing the usual suspects with a one size fits all approach, they're going to leave your organization. And
Right.
why? You ask yourself why. Well, because they can. They can
Right.
leave your organization
Right.
because those represent the best and the brightest. So
True.
they because of those skills, because of their credentials and resume, they can move from company to company or organization to organization.
Yeah.
So this is something I really want to stress, is that we've got to get beyond this one size fits all employee experience and really start to do workforce segmentation. Now, I understand it's not easy to do in some environments, highly unionized environments, for example, or in certain government agencies, for example. But to the extent possible, we do have to differentiate. So organizations will, like I mentioned, tend to cater to their B players because they represent 80% of the workforce. But you're going to alienate that top 10 or 20%. So they'll consistently say, well, we have constraints. This is what they'll say, hey, Dr. Folletta, we have constraints. We can't give everybody an advancement promotion opportunity because
Right.
we have structural constraints. We're flat. I get that. They'll say we have cultural constraints, right? We're a time and service culture,
Right.
or we have political constraints, or there may be fiscal constraints. We can't afford to give everybody pay raises. But what I always say is that we're not talking about everybody. We're talking about your top 10%. It's
Right.
not everybody. You can give the usual suspects to the lion's share of the organization, but you have to segment your high potential talent and critical scarce skilled people and give them the right mix of drivers in terms of what matters most to them. Otherwise, you'll lose them.
And also, in light of the whole D&I movement that's become more prevalent too, you have to manage that as well.
That's
Do you
right.
have
So
the
in
right
terms of
talent? Right.
so a talent segment is not just high potentials. You could look at it from a DEI and inclusion perspective,
Right.
well, I should say DEI and belonging perspective. And so the segment could be anything. It could be
Right.
people of color. It could be men, women. It could be critical skill set individuals, high potentials, high performers. It's whatever segment you identify. But you
Right.
really got to segment your workforce and figure out what is the mix of drivers that's going to move the needle on engagement for each of these talent segments.
Indeed.
It's been trendy lately to kind of move away from that. You've been hearing much, if you listen to the pundits and LinkedIn and everyone else, what you've been hearing is, oh, it's all about employee experience. It's all about culture. Yeah, that's critically important. But those are nebulous, broad concepts.
Right.
And what happens is the high potentials, the critical talent segments, get lost in the noise, right?
Right.
Because you're so focused on a one size fits all approach. So I always ask, well, you're going to create this wonderful employee experience and workplace culture, but for whom?
Yep.
The
Well, yeah,
80%?
right. And
The average Joe and Jane? Or what about your high potentials?
right. And it's
Yeah,
interesting because, even that when we see at this aspiring leaders section of the survey, it's not about the money. So the money ranks number 9. They want that
that's
advancement
right.
opportunity to go somewhere, like you said, they have the resume,
Yeah,
they have the experience,
yeah,
they want to go somewhere else. So the money, what's important, it's ranked number 9. They want the title, they want the decision
yeah.
making and the promotion opportunity. So it's a very
They
interesting
they want
finding.
they want the challenge.
Yeah.
But again, these don't represent all of your workforce. This is
Right.
probably this will be a segment of your workforce. Now, in this study, we had no way of knowing whether or not these individuals were truly high potentials, and only you and your organization, the audience that's listening today, you know who your high potentials are. So if you segment your high potentials, and the list looks remarkably similar to this, or it could be another mix of drivers. If you use the usual suspects, okay, you'll maintain the status quo. You'll take care of the hygiene stuff at a high level in terms of the employee experience and workplace culture, but you're likely to miss the mark. You might even alienate your high potential. So you have to do, on the back end, determine who the high potentials are and who the what groups are critical talent segments, and organizations do this, but they always come back to, well, we got these constraints. We can't give everybody. Well, it's not everybody. It's your top 10%, or whatever segment you're looking at. The usual suspects work fine for moving the needle overall, great for making a great employee experience and a positive, healthy workplace culture, but it's going to miss the mark for certain segments. It just will.
Indeed.
But it's fashionable to talk about employee engagement. It's fashionable to talk about, or I should say, employee experience, meaningful work, and workplace culture. But those are meaningful work. You can get people meaningful work, but if there's no opportunity for advancement and promotion, and they're an ambitious, high potential talent, they're going to go elsewhere for it.
Right.
Really, at the end of the day.
They're going to find a meaning somewhere else. Absolutely.
Yeah, and meaningful work means different things to different people.
Right. Exactly.
So that leads me really to the recommendations here. Please, by all, for the love of the gods, segment your workforce, including your HR talent. Don't forget about talent management for HR. In fact, when you look at the broader report of the study comes out, we're only giving you a snippet about the state of engagement, but that report also includes the extent to which HR are participants in their own talent management processes. More often than not, and we don't like to admit this, we don't always eat our own dog food, or the cobbler's children are not getting any shoes, right? When it comes to talent management. Oh, talent management's for the business, but not for HR. You see that too frequently, and it's not good. It's problematic on multiple levels. But that's in the report for those of you that when the report comes out, it should be out soon. HRCI will send an announcement on that. So again, recommendation number 1: segment your workforce, including HR talent. Avoid a one-size-fits-all. Right? Come up with the right mix of drivers and EVPs that matter most for each talent segment. Try to avoid all the hype, fads, and trends. There's a lot of noise and nonsense out there from LinkedIn influencers and workplace culture consultants, and they're shifting the narrative and refocusing on measuring and focusing on newfangled concepts like employee passion, employee experience, fulfillment, and thriving. Okay, you can shift the narrative or shift the dependent variable. This is the business outcomes I'm talking about, but these are just outcomes. It doesn't matter if you focus on engagement, passion, experience, fulfillment, meaning, thriving, whatever it might be. At the end of the day, you still got to focus on the drivers, factors, variables, and EVPs that precede and predict these outcomes. Right? So if you're just measuring these outcomes, that in and of itself is not going to give you much help. You're going to, we got high or low passion. We got people have a great employee experience or not so great. Okay, now what? The only way you're going to be able to focus and address the now what, right, is to identify the drivers that matter most, because they precede the state of engagement. They precede this notion of employee fulfillment or employee thriving. So without knowing the details, you can't just say, we're going to create a great experience, great culture, and that will drive engagement. All right, great culture for whom? Great experience for whom?
Right.
What specific drivers and factors? Are you segmenting your workforce? Oh, no, you're using a one-size-fits-all approach. And then you wonder why we're not moving the needle on certain talent segments in the workforce and why we have high attrition in certain areas. It shouldn't be no surprise, right? So you got to segment, you got to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. And the drivers, factors, and variables and EVPs, they matter regardless of which outcome you focus on here, right? And That's it in a nutshell. And I know it's something I feel very passionate about as a former HR leader and practitioner. And I often wonder, hey, do we measure employee engagement for HR talent, HR professionals? To what extent do HR professionals, are on the receiving end of talent management? All of those
Right,
insights and findings you'll find
right,
in this report that HRCI is
right,
going to release real
right.
soon.
Thank you, Dr. Folletta. There's a question here that I think has a common thread. Are you aware or could you recommend any platform or means of making the level of engagement more meaningful and traceable where you can track it and apply? Are
Yeah.
there applications out there that can be used by anyone?
Yeah, there are. There's a lot of things. So one is, if you're a big company and you don't have the resources, for example, or if you're a big company and you don't want to waste a lot of time on it, you can always hire a full service survey vendor, and there's a whole bunch of them
Right,
out there. But if you're a small to mid-sized company, for example, there are some really neat platforms out there, and even the large enterprise level companies are using. There are these SaaS-based platforms out there. I like Org Vitals. Brad Shook at the University of Louisville has worked with developing this platform. He has a validated employee engagement survey. His name's Dr. Brad Shook, and it's called Org Vitals. They're excellent. There's other platforms out there like Glint and others that are excellent platforms as well. And there's got to be at least a dozen or so SaaS-based platforms that can pulse workforce engagement at a relatively affordable cost. It
right,
just depends, and you could do it yourself with these tools, or you could bring in some consultants from these vendors that will help you every step of the way. And so you let them know, hey, I want to measure engagement with your platform if you use one of their SaaS-based platforms, but I'm also interested in the primary drivers that precede engagement too. Make
right,
sure you say that, and then say, hey,
right.
we also want to segment our workforce so we know what matters most.
Yeah.
But again, I
Yeah.
recommend doing a little exploration. Just type in SaaS-based um, platforms for employee engagement, and there's oodles and oodles of those out there in the marketplace.
Excellent. Dr. Folletta, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today and give us this insight into this wonderful survey. To our audience, as you know, we're available. You can contact us via social media or send us an email at info@hrci.org. But also, if you want a copy of this survey that Dr. Folletta worked very hard on and just touch the essentials of it, you can go to our website under Partners with HRCI, select Partner Network, and then look at the partner research. If you click on this red button, the state of engagement, you will find the results and the study and graphs that Dr. Folletta put together for us. So you can take a peek at it and expand your information or knowledge of what the study has indicated. But again, we appreciate you being here with us today, Dr. Folletta, and we appreciate the audience participating as well. Everybody have a great day. This is Amin Issa, GPHR, PHR, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for having me, Amini.
You're welcome. Take care.